I remember the moment like a knife pressing into my chest. The courtroom was silent, tension hanging in the air, and every eye was on me, but not the way I expected. My 10-year-old daughter walked up to the judge and pressed play on a video that would unravel everything the truth, he thought. He had buried forever, the secret he never wanted anyone to see. Lies, betrayal, and a cold, calculated cruelty I had once trusted more than anyone flickered across the screen. I froze, hands trembling, heart pounding. Nobody had seen this coming. Nobody, except me. And what played next would leave the entire courtroom and me speechless. If you have ever been hurt by someone you loved or trusted, hit that like button and subscribe. Today's story is proof that even in the darkest moments, courage and a little clever planning can lead to the sweetest, most satisfying form of justice. Watch closely. This is the moment where betrayal meets its reckoning. My name is Laura, and I am 34 years old. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets are lined with identical houses, manicured lawns, and picket fences that give the illusion of perfection. It is the kind of place where people smile politely at one another, nodding in passing, yet nobody really knows what is happening behind closed doors. I often thought about this as I walked past my neighbors carrying groceries or walking Emily to school. Their lives seemed flawless, while mine was slowly unraveling, hidden behind the mask of a carefully constructed domestic life. I married Daniel when I was 24. He was handsome in a conventional way, with perfectly styled hair, sharp cheekbones, and a smile that could light up a room. At first, he seemed perfect. He was charming, attentive, funny, and endlessly complimentary. I believed that I had found the person I would spend the rest of my life with. I told myself that he was my safe harbor in a chaotic world. I fell for him completely, blindly, without noticing the subtle cracks that would later widen into chasms. Those cracks appeared almost immediately after our wedding. They were tiny at first, a dismissive remark here, a forgotten promise there. I would notice him checking his phone during dinner, a quick glance at my messages. The way he would laugh just a little too loudly at something trivial while I tried to hold his attention. I rationalized everything. I told myself I was imagining things. I thought love required patience, forgiveness, and compromise. I thought I could weather anything. I was wrong. Then came Emily. She was the light of my life, a golden-haired, bright spark of innocence who seemed to radiate joy even in the darkest moments. I remember holding her for the first time, feeling her tiny heartbeat against my chest, and thinking that this was what purpose felt like. She was everything good and pure in the world, and I vowed silently that I would protect her at all costs. For a while, I clung to the idea that everything would be okay. Daniel's behavior fluctuated between charming and controlling, and I chose to focus on the charming. I believed that he would grow, that he would change once Emily arrived, that he would realize what mattered most. But over time, the charm evaporated, leaving behind a man I barely recognized. Daniel's cruelty was subtle at first. It began with small manipulations, accusing me of being too sensitive, calling me forgetful or overreacting. He would isolate me from friends and family, insisting that I needed to focus on our marriage and Emily. I remember evenings where I sat alone on the couch, staring at the walls, feeling a creeping sense of fear that I could not name. I felt trapped, invisible, and powerless. By the time Emily was 8, his behavior had escalated into open hostility. Daniel would criticize everything I did, from the meals I cooked to the clothes I wore. He would speak harshly to Emily, belittling her in ways that left me silently furious and helpless. I remember one evening, the kitchen dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. Daniel berating me for making a lasagna that he claimed was mediocre, while Emily clutched my hand tightly, tears welling in her eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted the world to burn, but I could not. I had to stay calm for Emily. I had to endure. Friends suggested I leave, but leaving meant upheaval, uncertainty, and exposure to the very real possibility that Daniel would manipulate the legal system to take everything from me. I stayed quietly enduring while secretly documenting everything. I started keeping a journal of every insult, every lie, every subtle attempt to control or manipulate me. I began recording phone calls, saving messages, and even filming small interactions where his cruelty became undeniable. The house itself became a character in our story. It was beautiful in the daylight, with sunlight streaming through wide windows and a garden that bloomed vibrantly in the spring. But at night, the walls seemed to close in. Shadows lengthened across the floors. Every creak of the staircase, every whisper of the wind felt like a reminder that I was trapped in someone else's carefully constructed world. I learned to move silently, to avoid conflict, to protect Emily with the smallest gestures, a reassuring smile, a gentle touch on her shoulder, a whispered, "I am here, always." Despite everything, Emily remained bright, curious, and resilient. She asked questions that I did not always have the courage to answer. "Why does Daddy yell?" she asked one night, tears glistening in her wide eyes. I told her that sometimes adults make mistakes, that sometimes people say things they do not mean. I held her close, wishing I could protect her from the pain of witnessing cruelty firsthand. I wanted to shield her from the world, but I could not shield her from him. Then came the day I finally filed for divorce. I remember walking into the courthouse, my hands shaking slightly, my stomach twisted into knots. The thought of facing Daniel in a legal arena filled me with fear and dread, but also with a strange sense of clarity. I knew that the moment of truth was coming. I had documented everything, collected evidence, and prepared myself for the battle ahead. But nothing could prepare me for the twist that would turn the entire case upside down. Emily was the first to sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. At 10 years old, she had already endured more than most children. One evening, she looked up at me with eyes that seemed to hold an understanding far beyond her years. "Mom," she said quietly, "I want him to see the truth. I want everyone to see it." Her voice was calm, resolute, and my heart ached with both pride and fear. Together, we formed a plan. I would guide her, protect her, okay, and give her the courage she needed to take the first step in exposing the lies, cruelty, and manipulation that had defined our lives for far too long. Every day leading up to the hearing, we rehearsed, we planned. We imagined the moment when the truth would finally be undeniable. When Daniel's carefully maintained facade would crumble, and when Emily's bravery would shine through. The night before the hearing, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Emily's soft breathing. I thought about the years we had endured, the pain we had silently carried, and the courage it would take to finally face Daniel in court. I felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a deep, simmering determination. The moment of reckoning was almost here. We were ready. And so, as the sun rose on the day of the hearing, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I knew that the end of our suffering was near. The injustice, the manipulation, and the cruelty that had haunted our lives were about to meet a force they could not overcome: truth, courage, and a daughter who refused to be silenced. From the moment I filed for divorce, Daniel transformed into the man I had feared in the quiet corners of my mind. The charming facade vanished completely, replaced with a calculated, controlled persona that hid a simmering anger beneath polite smiles and measured tones. In court, he presented himself as the wronged husband, the innocent victim of my supposed paranoia, as if the years of subtle cruelty, manipulation, and intimidation never existed. Every glance he cast toward the judge was precise, deliberate, designed to project composure, control, and authority. I could see the glimmer of unease in my own chest. This was the most dangerous version of him. His lawyer, a man with perfectly combed hair and a practiced smile, amplified the tension. He nodded at every word Daniel spoke, leaned toward the judge at every opportunity, and whispered insinuations that made my stomach twist. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears as I listened to Daniel describe me, a woman unfit to raise Emily, unstable, manipulative, and incapable of providing a stable home. Every accusation was a carefully placed knife. Every pause between his sentences was a silent challenge. In the weeks that followed, Daniel escalated his attacks outside the courtroom as well. He would call at odd hours, asking questions in a tone that was equal parts casual and accusatory. "Are you really capable of managing Emily on your own?" he asked one night, his voice calm yet venomous. "I just do not want her to be confused or unhappy." Each word dripped with menace. I could feel the weight of his control pressing against my chest. I spent hours replaying these calls in my head, cataloging his tone, his phrasing, the subtle attempts to undermine my confidence. I began to feel cornered, trapped in a psychological battle that seemed endless. Even at home, Daniel found ways to assert control. He would arrive unannounced, inspect the house, criticize the meals, or remark on the way I had organized Emily's room. Every gesture, every tone, every glance was designed to remind me that I was powerless. One evening, he lingered at the doorway for what felt like hours, observing Emily doing her homework. "She could be doing better," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for me to hear. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. I wanted to scream at him, to demand that he leave, but I could not. I had to maintain composure to shield Emily from the storm, while silently documenting everything. I began to feel the pressure of living in constant vigilance. Every word I spoke, every move I made, had to be carefully calculated. I wrote down every interaction, recorded every message, saved every voicemail. It became almost an obsession, but I knew that the only way to protect Emily and myself was to create a record of his true nature. I had to be prepared for the moment when truth would face deception, when justice would confront cruelty. The emotional toll was immense. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and sigh. Shadows stretched across the walls, and I imagined him watching me, judging me, waiting for me to falter. My body became tense, muscles tight with anxiety. Every sound, footsteps, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of leaves outside felt amplified, a reminder that I could not let my guard down. Emily sensed it too. She began asking questions, small but pointed. "Mom, why does he always make you sad?" she asked one evening, her small voice trembling. I held her close and whispered that he was a man who made mistakes, that sometimes adults act unfairly, and that we would face it together. The tension continued to mount in court. Daniel's lawyer was relentless. They questioned my parenting abilities, my judgment, and my emotional stability. I felt my heart racing as I answered, my voice steady but my hands trembling. Every smirk from Daniel, every subtle roll of his eyes felt like an attempt to undermine me entirely. I had to remind myself to breathe, to focus, to not allow his performance to shake me. The stakes were higher than ever. This was no longer a legal battle. This was a psychological war. Yet, beneath all the fear and frustration, I began to notice a change in myself. A spark of determination, a simmering fire that refused to be extinguished. I would not allow years of manipulation, ridicule, and control to define me. I would not allow Emily to grow up believing that cruelty and lies were acceptable. Every cruel word Daniel spoke, every sneer, every calculated glance strengthened my resolve. I began to see him not as an invincible opponent, but as a man who relied on deception, on performance, on fear to maintain control. I began to plan. I started to piece together the moments of cruelty into a narrative that would be undeniable. There was the time he yelled at Emily for spilling water on the floor, claiming it was her fault for being careless, when in reality he had left the cup within reach of a small child. There was the time he mocked me in front of friends, claiming I could not host a dinner party properly. There were countless messages where he disparaged my intelligence and questioned my ability to parent. Every piece of evidence, every carefully documented interaction became part of a larger tapestry that would expose the truth. Emily became my partner in this silent rebellion. She was too young to understand all the nuances, but she understood courage, justice, and truth. I taught her how to observe, how to document, how to trust her instincts. Together, we rehearsed how we might present our case, how we might face Daniel in court, and how the evidence we had gathered would speak for itself. Even in her small voice, there was determination that gave me strength. The night before the next hearing, I lay awake, listening to the house breathe. The faint hum of the street outside, the soft ticking of the clock, every sound felt amplified. I imagined Daniel walking into the courtroom, confident, smug, unaware that the truth was about to confront him in a way he could not escape. I imagined Emily, brave and unflinching, standing as the spark that would ignite the reckoning. I felt a strange mix of fear, anticipation, and exhilaration. The storm was about to break, and I could not wait to see justice take its course. And so the stage was set. The tension had reached its peak. Daniel believed he had orchestrated the perfect performance, the flawless portrayal of innocence and victimhood. But he had underestimated the quiet strength of a mother and her daughter. The pieces were in place. The countdown had begun. The moment of truth, of revelation, of vindication was almost here. Every day, every hour, every careful preparation brought us closer to the confrontation that would define our lives. Daniel's arrogance, cruelty, and sense of invincibility were about to meet their match. And I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing would ever feel as satisfying as the moment when he finally realized that his control, his lies, and his manipulation had failed completely. The breaking point came on a gray, drizzling morning. Sky was heavy, almost mourning the tension that filled the courtroom. Daniel sat across from me, calm, collected, radiating that familiar air of superiority. His hands rested lightly on the table, fingers drumming in a rhythm that was almost mocking. His lawyer leaned in, whispering small, pointed reminders of my alleged failings, as if they were reminders of my inadequacy. I felt my chest tighten, my hands cold, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. He began again, speaking with rehearsed precision, recounting minor incidents as evidence of my supposed instability. Every word he spoke, every subtle glance at the judge, was designed to undermine me. The warmth I had once felt toward him, the trust I had once placed in his hands, had long evaporated. I had spent years doubting myself because of him. But now, sitting there, hearing the familiar cadence of his manipulation, a fierce clarity washed over me. I realized in that moment that fear had controlled me for too long. I had endured years of calculated cruelty, endured nights of anxiety, endured a suffocating sense of powerlessness. And for what? To maintain the illusion of peace. To pretend that the man who had belittled me daily held some untouchable power. No, that ended today. I closed my eyes for a brief second, taking in a deep, measured breath. I remembered every slight, every manipulation, every whispered comment that had made me doubt myself. I remembered Emily's bright eyes, filled with trust and hope, and I felt a surge of protective fury. I could not allow Daniel to continue his performance unchallenged. I could not allow him to dictate the narrative of our lives. I would not just defend myself. I would confront the truth, unflinching, in a way that left no room for denial. For weeks, I had prepared. Every recording, every screenshot, every filmed interaction between Daniel and Emily had been carefully cataloged. I had rehearsed the steps in my mind, imagining the courtroom, the expressions on the faces of the judge and jury, the rise and fall of tension as evidence unfolded. The plan was precise, a sequence of revelation that would expose Daniel completely. I had waited for the perfect moment, and that moment had arrived. Emily, sitting quietly beside me, seemed to sense the shift in my energy. She reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently. I looked down at her and whispered, "Are you ready?" Her small nod, full of determination, reminded me that we were in this together. She was more than just my daughter. She was my ally, my spark of courage, the symbol of everything I had fought to protect. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze flicking between us and Daniel. He did not yet know what was about to unfold, and I was careful to allow the suspense to build, just enough to ensure that the impact would be undeniable. I waited for the exact moment, listening to Daniel's lawyer continue his narrative of manipulation and alleged instability. Each word he spoke was a gauntlet, a challenge to my resolve. But I did not falter. My pulse raced, adrenaline coursing through me, sharpening my focus. Every detail mattered. Finally, I motioned subtly for Emily to stand. The small movement seemed almost imperceptible, yet it carried a weight that neither Daniel nor his lawyer anticipated. She rose, her small frame trembling slightly, and walked forward with measured steps. The courtroom seemed to pause. The air itself felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Every eye was on her, yet none could fully grasp what was about to happen. Emily pressed play on the video we had prepared, and the room was instantly transformed. The first frame displayed Daniel's voice, calm and controlled as he berated me in private, twisting words and belittling my every action. Then came the footage of him speaking harshly to Emily, his words cutting like knives, his tone cold and unyielding. Each clip revealed the pattern of manipulation, deceit, and cruelty, a stark contrast to the persona he had presented in court. I felt a rush of exhilaration and anxiety as the judge leaned forward, eyes widening. Daniel's smirk faltered, his confidence slipping with each passing second. He began to fidget, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in posture, but it was enough. The cracks in his carefully constructed facade began to show. His lawyer, too, seemed momentarily stunned, struggling to find words to regain control. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat, but I did not move. I allowed the silence to linger, allowing every detail of the video to sink into the minds of those present. Every cruel word, every manipulative gesture, every instance of intimidation became undeniable evidence. Daniel had underestimated the quiet strength of a mother and her daughter. He had believed that control, charm, and fear could shield him from the truth. He had been wrong. As the video progressed, Daniel's face grew pale. His eyes darted toward the judge, then away, then back again. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The judge's gaze was unwavering, absorbed entirely in the undeniable evidence unfolding before him. I felt a tremor of satisfaction, a validation of every moment I had endured. Every silent night spent documenting his behavior, every ounce of courage I had mustered to get to this moment. Emily finished the video and turned toward me. I could see the mix of pride and anxiety in her eyes, and I reached out to hold her hand again. The courtroom remained silent, hanging on the precipice of reaction. Then, slowly, the judge spoke, acknowledging the evidence and the courage it had taken for a 10-year-old to reveal such truths. Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to panic, his mouth opening and closing without sound, his confident demeanor crumbling entirely. It was in that moment that I felt a profound sense of release. Years of fear, anxiety, and helplessness seemed to pour out of me. The storm of manipulation that had dominated our lives was breaking, piece by piece, under the weight of truth. I felt Emily's hand tremble in mine, and I whispered softly, "You did it. You helped us see the truth." She smiled faintly, and I realized that this was not just my victory, it was hers too. The turning point had arrived. The moment where years of endurance, preparation, and courage intersected with undeniable evidence. Daniel had reached the limit of his control. I had reached the limit of my fear. And in that brief, suspended moment, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. I knew, even as I felt the tremors of relief and triumph course through me, that the hardest part was not over. The legal process would continue, but the psychological victory, the moral reckoning, had already been achieved. For the first time in years, I felt unshakable, unyielding, and utterly validated. The journey to this point had been painful, harrowing, and exhausting. But it had prepared me for this exact moment. The revelation, the confrontation, and the undeniable truth standing boldly in the center of a silent courtroom. The plan did not begin in a moment of rage. It began in silence, late nights, dim lamps, the soft hum of the house breathing around us while Emily slept beside me, clutching her favorite blanket. Those were the moments when I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Not just evidence, but truth. I spread papers across the surface like pieces of a fractured life. Screenshots, audio transcripts, video timestamps. Every item represented a moment I had once swallowed in fear. This was not revenge fueled by hatred. This was precision. I knew one mistake could cost everything. One emotional outburst. One poorly timed reveal. Daniel thrived on chaos and confusion. I had learned that the hard way, so I did the opposite. I became methodical, cold, focused. The first step was organization. I categorized everything chronologically, not by severity, but by pattern. I wanted the judge to see what I had lived through. Not a single outburst, not a bad day. Sustained campaign of control. That distinction mattered more than anything. I listened to recordings again and again, forcing myself to sit through moments that made my stomach twist. Daniel's voice, calm, condescending. The way he spoke to Emily when he thought no one was watching. Each time I wanted to turn it off, I reminded myself why this mattered. Justice does not come from comfort. Then came the hardest decision. Emily. I wrestled with it for days, weeks. Involving her meant risk. Emotional risk, ethical risk. But excluding her meant silencing the one witness Daniel never anticipated. He believed children were powerless, invisible, forgetful. He was wrong. I did not burden Emily with anger. I gave her truth. I explained that telling the truth was not about hurting anyone. It was about protecting ourselves. I asked her if she felt ready. I told her she could say no. That I would protect her no matter what. She looked at me with a calm that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. He lies, she said simply. People should know. That was the moment the plan solidified. We rehearsed quietly, never dramatically, never emotionally. I taught her where to stand, how to breathe slowly, how to press play, and then step back. I told her she did not need to speak unless asked. The truth would speak for itself. Every rehearsal ended the same way. A long hug, silence, then sleep. As the hearing approached, Daniel grew more confident. That was the most dangerous part. Confidence made him sloppy. He laughed more. He leaned back in his chair. He spoke over others. He believed he had already won. That arrogance was the final ingredient. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and gray. It's a kind of day where the sky presses low, heavy with unspoken tension. I dressed carefully. Neutralcolors.com presence. No jewelry that could distract. No expression that could be read as aggression or fear. Emily wore a simple sweater. Nothing that would draw attention. She held the tablet close to her chest, fingers wrapped tightly around its edges. Daniel barely looked at us. That was mistake number one. Inside the courtroom, everything felt amplified. It's a scrape of chairs, the shuffle of papers. It's a distant echo of footsteps in the hall. My heartbeat felt too loud for my body. I slowed my breathing. In, out. Control the moment. Daniel began as expected. Smooth, polished, victimized. He spoke about concern, about stability, about protecting his daughter. The irony burned, but I remained still. He did not know he was narrating his own downfall. When it was my turn, I did not rush. I spoke calmly. I acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. I expressed concern for Emily's well-being. I said nothing about Daniel's character. Then I asked one question. Your Honor, may the court hear directly from a witness who has lived this. The pause that followed felt endless. The judge nodded. Emily stood. That moment stretched time itself. Chairs shifted. Someone inhaled sharply. Daniel finally turned, irritation flickering across his face. He did not recognize danger yet. He assumed sentiment, manipulation. Emily walked forward. This was the moment everything changed. She did not cry. She did not hesitate. She placed the tablet on the stand and pressed play. The first clip filled the room with Daniel's voice, private, unfiltered. The courtroom transformed instantly. What had been controlled and procedural became intimate and raw. The words echoed off the walls, stripped of context and excuses. Each sentence landed like a measured blow. Then another clip. Then another. The judge leaned forward. Daniel stiffened. His body betrayed him before his words could. His lawyer whispered urgently. Daniel shook his head, eyes fixed on the screen. The man who had dominated rooms with charm now looked small, trapped, exposed. The most devastating moment came when Emily appeared in the video herself. Younger, smaller, standing silently while Daniel spoke to her with cold authority. No shouting, no theatrics, just control. That was the moment the room shifted, because everyone understood something then. This was not a bad marriage. This was a pattern. When the video ended, the silence was unbearable. I did not look at Daniel. I looked at the judge. Emily stepped back to my side. Her hand found mine. I squeezed once. Reassurance, pride, relief. Daniel tried to speak. The judge raised a hand. He had lost the right to control the narrative. In that instant, I felt something I had not felt in years. Power. Not loud. Not aggressive. Quiet. Absolute. The execution was complete. Not because Daniel was humiliated, but because the truth stood alone, undeniable, unchallenged. Everything that followed would be procedure. But the reckoning had already happened. And Daniel knew it. The courtroom felt suspended, like the air itself had frozen. The video had ended, leaving nothing but the sound of quiet breathing, shuffling papers, and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Every person in the room was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. Daniel sat across from me, still rigid, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. His hands clenched the edges of the table until his knuckles glowed white. His eyes darted nervously, searching for escape routes that did not exist. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Each second he remained silent felt like a spotlight on his unraveling facade. The lawyer leaned forward, whispering urgent instructions, but Daniel barely registered them. He had always relied on charm and manipulation, but charm could not mask the truth. The weight of exposure pressed on him, a force unstoppable and merciless. The judge adjusted his glasses deliberately, his gaze fixed on Daniel. That small, precise movement carried more authority than any raised voice could. It demanded attention. It demanded accountability. Daniel stiffened, as though he could physically straighten himself into innocence. But there was no posture that could undo the undeniable evidence now in plain view. I felt a strange stillness in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and relief. This was the moment we had built toward. Years of anxiety, fear, and silent endurance condensed into these precise seconds. Every recording, every video, every carefully documented instance of cruelty had led to this point. And now the weight of truth sat squarely on Daniel's shoulders. The judge spoke slowly, ensuring every word landed. He referenced Daniel's earlier testimony, contrasting it with the evidence we had presented. Each contradiction was highlighted, each manipulation laid bare. The courtroom listened, rapt, as the pattern of deception became impossible to deny. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. He leaned forward, then recoiled, trapped in the very reality he had tried to control. Daniel attempted to interject. The lawyer's voice rose, urging him to maintain composure. The judge raised a hand. One word, no. Silence fell like a stone, dense and final. Daniel froze, the color draining from his face. The room seemed to tilt, the air charged with anticipation. Every eye turned toward him. This was the moment the mask slipped. The ruling that followed was precise. Custody was awarded to me. Daniel would have supervised visitation. Mandatory counseling was required, and official documentation of his behavior was entered into record. Each word struck like a measured blow, dismantling the carefully constructed narrative he had clung to for years. He had been powerful in public, but in this instant he was powerless. The truth had stripped him bare. Daniel's body betrayed him. He slumped into his chair, shoulders collapsing, jaw clenched so tightly it was almost audible. His lawyer whispered hurriedly, but Daniel did not respond. His eyes flickered to mine for the briefest moment, searching for recognition or protest. But all he found was calm. There was no anger, no malice, only certainty and resolve. The man who had thrived on intimidation and control could not regain authority here. He had lost it entirely. I felt a strange rush, a release that was both physical and emotional. Years of fear, anxiety, and sleepless nights seemed to pour out of me in a single exhale. My shoulders relaxed, my heartbeat slowed. The constant tension I had carried like armor dissolved. Emily's small hand found mine beneath the table, squeezed it gently, grounding both of us in the reality of this moment. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and awe. Walking past Daniel after the ruling, I could see the disbelief etched into his features. He had been so certain, so meticulously prepared, that the unraveling felt unbearable. He had believed in his own invincibility. That belief had been shattered in front of everyone. Microhook. The illusion of power can crumble faster than the bravest of facades. Outside the courthouse, the light seemed sharper, almost blinding. I inhaled deeply, tasting freedom in the crisp air. Emily stepped beside me, squinting and smiling for the first time in years without reservation. The weight of our ordeal lifted slightly, replaced by clarity and relief. The world no longer felt oppressive. The house that once echoed with tension and dread could now breathe. The walls no longer loomed. The shadows no longer threatened. Daniel's consequences extended beyond the courtroom. His friends, who had once whispered in admiration of his charisma, now kept their distance. The professional reputation he had curated meticulously began to fracture. The recordings, the evidence, the truth itself became a permanent testament to his manipulation. What could not be undone was his exposure. What could not be erased was the undeniable pattern of cruelty he had exhibited over years. At home, the release was almost tangible. The quiet was no longer ominous, but expansive. Emily curled up beside me on the couch, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. For the first time in years, there were no raised voices, no abrupt knocks at the door, no anxious glances to see if he had entered without warning. The air was calm, safe, ours. I closed my eyes and let the weight of endurance drain away. This was not revenge in the way some might imagine. It's far more powerful. It was exposure. It was undeniable truth. It was justice not served in theatrics, but in certainty. Daniel had lost control. He had lost narrative. He had lost credibility. And we had gained freedom. Emily looked up at me, eyes shining with a mix of relief and wonder. She whispered softly, "Mom, we did it." Her voice trembled only slightly, but the meaning behind it resonated profoundly. We had endured the storm. We had prepared meticulously, and we had emerged intact, victorious not through force, but through truth. The moment crystallized in my mind. I understood then that justice does not always announce itself with spectacle. Sometimes it arrives quietly, irrevocably, and leaves no room for doubt. Daniel's fall was complete. His attempts to control, manipulate, and intimidate were gone. He would carry this exposure forever. And Emily carried a far greater inheritance, the knowledge that courage, preparation, and truth can topple even the most meticulously constructed lies. Later that evening, the house felt different. The rooms were larger. The walls seemed to breathe. Every creak, every hum of the refrigerator, every rustle of leaves outside the window felt safe. Emily and I moved through the space slowly, deliberately, savoring the absence of fear. The freedom was subtle, almost fragile, but it was ours, was unshakable because it was built on truth. I realized then that the real consequence was not humiliation for Daniel. It was liberation for us. The calm that followed, the security that enveloped us, was more satisfying than any dramatic collapse could have been. Microhook. True power is not vengeance. True power is control over your own life and the courage to expose the truth without compromise. For the first time in years, I slept without dread. Emily slept peacefully, unafraid. And I understood finally that we had not only survived, we had reclaimed our lives. We had rewritten the rules. The storm had passed. The reckoning was complete. The truth had prevailed, and nothing could take that away. The days that followed the ruling were quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. The world did not rush to notice the shift, but I did. Every moment became an exercise in awareness, in presence, in understanding the weight of what had happened. Daniel's downfall had been public, undeniable, and irreversible. But the true reward was not the collapse of a man. It was the reclamation of our lives, the restoration of control over a story that had been hijacked for years. Karma, I realized, does not always arrive in the form of spectacle. It does not always seek vengeance. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, patient. It accumulates slowly, in the unnoticed moments, in the choices that add up over time. Daniel had spent years cultivating fear and doubt. He believed he could bend the narrative to his will. But every lie, every manipulation, every cruel word had left a trail. Karma was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Every piece of evidence, every recorded interaction, every moment of courage from Emily and myself became the mechanism through which justice would assert itself. I thought often about the lessons embedded in the ordeal. The first was that endurance alone is not enough. Surviving does not guarantee freedom. To survive and thrive, one must combine courage with strategy, patience with action. For years, I had endured in silence, hoping that the storm would pass. It did not. The storm persisted because it was fueled by deliberate cruelty. I learned that silence can protect temporarily, but truth requires voice. Courage, in its purest form, is not a loud declaration. It is a deliberate, unwavering choice to act, despite fear. The second lesson was the importance of documentation, preparation, and meticulous attention to detail. Justice does not favor the passive. It favors those who anticipate, who prepare, who understand the mechanisms of accountability. The recordings we made, the notes we kept, the rehearsals we undertook with Emily, all of these were critical. They were not acts of revenge in the impulsive sense. They were acts of preservation, of self-protection, of foresight. I understood then that power does not always belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who wield truth with precision. The third lesson was about empathy and protection, especially in relation to Emily. Involving her in the process had been difficult, frightening, and emotionally complex. I worried endlessly about the weight of knowledge placed on a child. But I also understood that sheltering her from reality entirely would have deprived her of agency, understanding, and courage. She learned that truth is a form of strength. That standing up, even in fear, can reshape the world. That lesson, imparted gently but firmly, was as valuable as the ruling itself. Our home became a place of rebirth. Every corner, every room, every familiar space carried new meaning. The echoes of fear and tension were replaced with quiet laughter, small triumphs, and deliberate routines that anchored us in stability. The kitchen, once a battlefield of judgment and control, became a place of planning, cooking, and laughter. Emily and I rebuilt not just our life, but our sense of normalcy, redefining what security and joy could look like. I found myself reflecting often on the nature of human behavior. Daniel had seemed invincible because he projected confidence, charm, and control. But beneath the surface, he was fragile, dependent on deception to maintain authority. Observing that truth became a reminder that power, when derived from manipulation and fear, is inherently unstable. Justice is not merely about punishment. It is about exposure, about removing the illusions that allow harm to persist. When those illusions collapse, the consequences follow naturally. I thought about forgiveness, not for Daniel, but for myself. I had carried guilt and doubt for years, questioning whether I had done enough, whether I had acted too slowly, whether I had failed Emily. Forgiveness in this context was not about absolving Daniel. It was about releasing myself from the weight of what had occurred. I allowed myself to feel the triumph, the relief, the liberation, without apology. That internal reconciliation was as transformative as the legal victory. There was also a deeper recognition of resilience. Adversity does not always announce itself as such. It arrives quietly, often disguised as everyday struggle. Living under manipulation and fear, I had grown attuned to survival in its most basic forms. But survival alone does not create strength. True resilience is forged in deliberate action, in courage that is measured and sustained. In the conscious decision to reclaim agency even when the path is fraught with uncertainty. Emily became both my mirror and my compass. Watching her confidence grow, witnessing her understanding of justice, responsibility, and courage was profoundly affirming. She learned that power lies not in intimidation, but in preparation, not in fear, but in clarity. She understood that truth has a weight that cannot be ignored, and that when wielded wisely, it is more effective than rage. Her growth reminded me that the ultimate victories are not always visible to the world. They are personal, intimate, and enduring. We began to imagine new beginnings. Vacations, once impossible, became plans we discussed with excitement. Evenings filled with simple routines, reading together, cooking together, playing small games in the living room, became sacred. Life once shadowed by tension and fear unfolded gradually, intentionally. We no longer measured our days by caution, but by possibility. Every moment carried the freedom we had fought for, the freedom we had earned. And yet, the memory of the ordeal remained, not as a wound, but as a foundation. It reminded me that courage is cumulative. That truth, when meticulously prepared and deployed, cannot be denied. That liberation requires both patience and action. That victories are sweetest when they are hard-earned, precise, and aligned with moral justice. Daniel's downfall was irreversible, but it was also instructive. It illustrated that life does not favor cruelty, manipulation, or deceit indefinitely. Every action has consequence, every pattern eventually emerges, and every hidden truth can be brought to light. Looking back, the most powerful realization was this: the story did not end with him, it ended with us. The courtroom victory was only one chapter. The true story was the reclaiming of our lives, the restoration of dignity, the rebuilding of trust, and the awakening of courage within a child who would carry these lessons forward. That is the essence of justice. Not spectacle, not humiliation, but transformation. In those quiet evenings, I often whispered a silent promise to myself and Emily. We would protect our lives, our peace, and our truth. We would remember the lessons, but not carry the fear. We would celebrate courage, practice foresight, and honor resilience. We would live fully, freely, without the shadow of manipulation. That promise became our compass, guiding us toward each day with purpose and clarity. If this story gave you chills, made your heart race, or reminded you of the power of truth and courage, do not keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments, tell us about your most satisfying victories over injustice, and hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that explore resilience, justice, and the incredible power of standing up when it matters most.